Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Well, you're probably familiar with today's guest because she's been on the show many times before, but never by herself. And then it kind of looked weird seeing her in the frame all by herself because we're so used to seeing her with her husband, Dr. John McDougall. Well, it's none other than Mary McDougall. She's a retired nurse, homemaker. She's the co-founder of the McDougall Program, the co-author of 13 national best-selling books. Over, I think 5 of them were her own cookbooks. And for the past 50 years, she's worked with Dr. John McDougall, caring for people using diet therapy to restore their health and appearance. And she's created over 3,000 health-supporting recipes. As a matter of fact, I think she would be considered the low-fat vegan OG, because she really invented low-fat, oil-free vegan cooking. So we're here to talk to her today without Dr. McDougall. So maybe she'll have some juicy things to say about him. I know there's a few questions about him, all respectful, I'm sure. Please welcome Mary to the show. It's so nice. I've never talked to you by yourself.
I know, it's weird.
It is weird. It's like,
I feel like there's something missing that's usually sitting right here.
I know, that's so funny. You guys are just such a dynamic duo, but you really, without you, I don't know if Dr. McDougall, to be honest, would have been as successful. He'd have been as dynamic, but I don't know if he'd have gone as far in life.
Well, what's really neat, AJ, is he often admits that too. So I do feel needed.
That is so cool because, I think the science is great, but it's like, you can't eat the science. And without the practical, it's just the theories.
Oh, well, yeah. In the beginning, that was the same way for me. When he told me we had to change the way we eat it, admittedly, we did it slowly, but it was tough at first.
How did you figure it out though? Because, now everybody refers to your work, your books, your recipes, so many of them free on the McDougall website, but there wasn't, I admire people that are the first to do anything in life, like who thinks of things first. But as a chef, when I try to think of things like maybe replacing sugar, I think about food, but how did you figure out oil-free cooking when there was not really a book or somebody to teach you?
I just had to try. Because when we first got married, we ate, when John and I married, his family ate completely different from mine. He was brought up with, always having a big piece of meat as the main dish and then potatoes or another starch on the side with vegetables. And in my family, we had casseroles. And my mom was not a great cook. And so I never really learned how to cook from her. Before I met John, I just ate really simple things. I would open up a can of stewed tomatoes and that would be my dinner. And I just never cooked for myself or for anybody else. And so when we first got married and he told me, what he wanted for breakfast, for example, I was just shocked. He wanted eggs and bacon and all this stuff for breakfast. And in my family, all we ate for breakfast forever was cereal, dry cereal with milk. That we never had anything else. The only time I ever had eggs was maybe once a month. My mom would make them for dinner, or maybe my dad. I don't think my mom knew how to make eggs. And so it was completely different. And, the first time I never made a rib roast. And when John told me he wanted a rib roast, I'd had this trusty old Better Homes and Gardens or Good Housekeeping or something cookbook, one of those old red plaid ones that you'd open up, and I looked in there and learned how to make rib roast, and it was probably terrible because I never made one before, and so it was just a completely different way of eating, and so when John. And this is the way we ate. And when he talks about, he heard Dennis Burkett talking about fiber. Really the only thing we changed was we switched from white bread to brown bread. And I don't think we made a whole lot of other changes until we moved to the Big Island in 1973. And we started eating grain-fed beef and free range poultry. And because we kind of discovered that we didn't want to eat all the stuff with hormones in it and things like that. So that was about all that we changed on the Big Island. John was busy learning about, his patients being second and third generation people and eating different foods, but it really didn't filter down to us, until we left the Big Island and went back to Oahu, and then he started doing his research. And so he would go to the medical library, which happened to be right next door to the medical center where he worked. And he'd bring home these articles, just, stacks of articles. We had them laying all over the apartment, or I guess we were living in a house by then. And he'd finish reading these articles and he'd say, Mary, we really can't eat red meat anymore. And I'd say, well, it's fine. I never liked it anyway, so I didn't care. And so and then I cooked more chicken and fish, and I still used a lot of cheese. So, I mean, those things, they didn't really change. And then he'd come home with another stack of articles, and he'd read all those, and he'd say, chicken and fish, they're really just the same as red meat because they're still a muscle, and they raise your cholesterol, and they do all these bad things to the body. So I said, well, all right, And about that time, that was around 1976 or 1977, I guess. And there were a lot of cookbooks out there that were vegetarian, and they were really heavy in the eggs and cheese area. And so for a while there, I focused on meals that had lots of eggs or cheese or something, but they were still in casseroles. They were made with pasta and vegetables and cheese in a casserole. Or, I learned how to make spinach with butter and stuff like that, which I had never eaten spinach before. We never had spinach in my house. And so I guess I learned how to use a few different things that way. And then he came home a few weeks later and he said, Mary, dairy is just, and cheese, they're just liquid meat, and we can't eat that stuff. And I said, oh, well, we have some friends that have a natural food store. It was called Earthseed, and it was in Kailua, which was a small town on Oahu. And when natural food stores first came along, they had these huge bins. Remember these big bins of food they were loaded with beans and grains and all kinds of things and they never had recipes or anything with them. They were just there. And so I would get bags of all these things and take them home and learn how to do things with them. And it was a lot of trial and error. I mean, if you talk to my kids, there were a lot of things, we threw away because they were just, you really couldn't eat them. I didn't know how to cook them. And, AJ, I never was a cook. I can still remember the first time I made a sauce without oil. And I made a cornstarch thickener. My mom used to make a cornstarch slurry, and she'd say you made this slurry and you add it to the oil and then it thickens up. And so I thought you had to have the oil to make the cornstarch thicken up. And I was just shocked, absolutely shocked when I found out that you could thicken things with a cornstarch slurry without oil. I can still remember the feeling. I didn't know you could do that. And so
there's a lot of people that still don't know that, Mary. They just cannot fathom cooking or baking without oil. It's like they can't believe it can be done.
Yeah, just like, and baking too. They always put eggs and oil into muffins and pancakes and then things like that. And I had to learn that those kind of things can actually be made without those things, because you never would believe it if you listened to anybody else. So I just had to try. And then I think what really moved me over the edge was when he came home with another stack of papers. This was a few months later. And he said, Mary, you really can't use any oil anymore either. It's just as bad, or it's even worse. And I was just like, what am I going to cook? Or how am I going to cook? There was more like it. And it was a shock. It was a real shock. And I had to do a lot of learning myself and a lot of experimenting. But at least by the time he told me that, I knew how to use beans and grains and pastas and things like this, because I was used to making casseroles. And so I could combine things together with different kinds of sauces and leave out the oil, and it turned out. And so it was fun, but it was a challenge. It was one of those things that I don't know right now at my age, I look back and I think, how in the world did you ever do that?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, like that you basically discovered something that hadn't been discovered. And imagine if Dr. McDougall was married to somebody disagreeable, like, you just went along with it. That's incredible, because it isn't easy, to do something you've never done.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of person I am, though, AJ. When he told me, we had to do something, I was like, oh, well, okay. And that's the kind of person, that's the way, I was raised. And so I said, sure, I'll try. And luckily things worked out. And I figured out how to make these things.
Yeah,
otherwise.
That is incredible. It really is. I mean, it's just, you should be in some kind of Hall of Fame for that, like, or Guinness Book of World Records,
Right.
Because you've helped so many people, and you really set the stage for all of us that cook that way now, because once somebody does something, like when somebody breaks a world record, for example, that people say something's impossible, but once somebody does it, it sets the stage for so many other people to do it, Well,
it's really fun for me to see all the people online these days that are cooking this way, and they're making all these delicious creations without oil, without butter, without eggs, and they're fabulous. And the nice thing to know is that, like, I guess I kind of started that.
Yeah.
And had other people realize that they could do the same thing. And now I see some really creative chefs that are much more creative than I was. I was just a basic home cook, and luckily I liked being in the kitchen. So
at first you were really not a cook at all. I mean, you didn't even start out with culinary skill, really.
No, I didn't. Even chopping onions was a big deal to me in the beginning.
In a way, we could say you're the mother of low-fat vegan cooking.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I think that's, there's such a misconception with oil. And we don't even need to get into the health aspect, whether it's good or not, but people just really can't wrap their head around that you can cook or bake without it, because that's how they learned.
Well, and even if you buy, frozen vegetables, you want to save some time, so you buy frozen vegetables. It tells you have to cook these vegetables in oil in a pan. So, everything is geared to everyone using oil. And so it's really hard for people to get their heads around the fact that you don't need that. You can just leave it alone, and they taste great. And there are so many sauces out there these days. It was much harder when I started, because I couldn't go into, especially into the markets, especially when we first started out, there was nothing. There was just nothing. I had to make everything from scratch. I made my own, when my kids were growing up, I made my own cashew milk and my own almond milk for them to use on their cereals. And to this day, my kids still say, oh, I like cashew milk the best, because that's what they grew up on. And so you couldn't go to the store and buy soy milk or oat milk or rice milk or any of the choices that you have now. And you couldn't buy any of the vegan junk food either.
Nice. I think oil is a triumph of marketing over science.
Yes, I think so too, because it's cheap. And it does add things to food, like things stick better when you have oil in them, like the seasonings and things like that. If you're going to cook some vegetables and you want flavor to stick to them, your natural inclination is, well, I'll throw a little oil in the pan and then I can season them and the oil will stick to the vegetables. Or if you're making muffins or something like that, you think, well, I need to use eggs or oil because it won't be moist and it won't rise if I don't use these things. And it's just not true. And luckily, there are enough people out there these days that are making these things and showing others that it can work.
Yeah, I think oil is what makes it so hard for people to eat at restaurants, because restaurants have not gotten the memo yet that it's possible.
Restaurants will never get the memo. It's impossible. Even if you ask, if you go into a restaurant and you say, I want, my food cooked with no oil or as little oil as possible, it'll still come out covered with oil. And you think, whoa, I wonder what it would look like if I didn't ask for no oil. So it's impossible. And here where we live in Portland, it's especially noticeable because Portland is kind of well known for having lots of vegan restaurants. And we can't eat in any of them because they're all just loaded with oil or fake meat or fake cheeses. It's just, they're vegan, but they're not healthy. And so we don't eat out much anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I agree. Well, your food's so good. Why would you want to really, So
well, these days, I learned over the years too, is to keep it simple. In the beginning, I think I focused a lot more on fancier meals. I made lots of casseroles. I made meatloaves with beans and grains. And so I guess I focused more on having the plate filled with a lot of different things. And it wasn't until I got older, or I learned from my kids that they like simple things, that I even came up with the quick and easy cookbook, which was 15 minutes or less. So and you talk to any of my kids and they'll remember all the things I made and the things I experimented with and which book it went into and how old they were when I was doing these things. So they were my guinea pigs.
That's great. I want to ask you some questions about the kids, but first I want to read a nice comment from Pamela, who's watching live. She says, I love Mary. Thank you for all you've done to promote healthy cooking. And Gail says, you're so inspiring, Mary. And she's suggesting a cookbook title for your next book called Mary's Table.
Oh, well, I don't know if I'll ever write another cookbook, but I like that.
Yeah, that's a great one. So I'm sure everybody wants to know, what's it like being married to Dr. McDougall?
Well, it's never boring. I can tell you that for sure. I mean, he's always got some new idea that he's coming up with. Now he's doing a lot of work on trying to educate the public on what he would like people to know, on how to take care of themselves, how to take care of the planet, how to and this is one of the reasons that we have a really successful online class, is because people can do this in the comfort of their home and really learn about how their doctor, or if John were their doctor, how he would be taking care of them and curing their what they think of as incurable diseases. And so, we take people for 12 days and we teach them everything that we know. And they have guidance counselors that go with them throughout the whole 12 days. And then they're back with them every week after that. And we have meetings with them twice a month after they leave. So we keep up with all these people, and, we kind of just move them along. And so if they have any questions, they can ask us. And that's what people need, is they really need help. And so John's really focusing now on the kind of things that he can tell people, and they can listen to, and they can find out what he would tell them if he were their doctor. And so, and even the climate is the same way, is what can we do to help the planet? And so he works on these things all the time. So it's never boring. There's always something going on.
That's funny. Well, what's the best part about being married to him?
We have a lot of fun together. We like to do the same kind of things. We did a whole lot of, ocean going sailing when we were younger. And then after that, we got into skiing, and we had a condo up when we would ski every weekend with the kids. And then we had a airplane, and we both learned how to fly. And, we were instrument rated twin engine pilots, and we flew all over and taught classes, and he gave lectures. And so we've done all these things in our lives, but it's always been together. It's never been, well, you do this and I'll do this. We've always kind of done the same kind of thing. So I guess we were lucky in that we're kind of opposite personalities, but we like the same kind of things. And so even as we're older, even though we don't do all these exciting things anymore, like sailing and flying airplanes and going skiing, we just enjoy being together. So we go out walking and sitting in the sun, and, those kind of things that we enjoy, and being with our families.
That's great. What was more difficult, learning to fly or inventing low-fat vegan cooking?
Oh, man. Well, learning how to fly was really hard. I thought it was going to be easy. I thought it was going to be just like getting into a car and learning how to take off and land. And I didn't realize how many rules there were. There are just like highways up in the sky that you have to fly from point A to point B, and you have to stay on that heading. And there's people around you telling you where you have to go and how high you can be and how low you can be. And it was really hard. There are so many rules. And I never realized it was going to be that difficult, and we tried to compress it. So we learned it all in this really short period of time. At least when I was learning how to cook, I had, months and weeks. And, for me, it was every time I would figure out a new recipe, I would write it down or type it up, and we would copy it on our old mimeograph machines. Remember what those were?
Yeah, that's the original Xerox machine.
Yeah. And we would pass them out to our patients so they had something to cook when they went home, and John told them how he wanted them to eat. And so I guess I had more time, and I could make more mistakes without it being deadly.
Exactly. You're not going to kill anybody with your
I'm not going to kill anybody.
That's so funny. Entry says, sometimes I bought Dr. McDougall's books just to get Mary's recipe. And Karen and Louise both say, I love Mary. So you got a lot of fans here.
Oh, thanks.
Oh yeah, we got some questions that were sent in, but I see a live one from Diane. She says, were your kids raised plant-based? And what are some good resources for raising kids plant-based? And did you focus on getting your kids adequate calcium?
Well, I did. Let's see. Heather was 2 when we changed, and Pat was 1 when we changed to a plant-based diet. So I would say that they were pretty much raised that way. And our youngest son, Craig, he was always raised that way because he was 7 years younger. And I never had any books then. So I listened to what John said, and he said, they're getting adequate protein and calcium from the way that we feed them. And so there weren't any books out, so I never had any books. So I never worried about protein or calcium or anything else. I just trusted that the foods that I was feeding them were what they needed. And they all grew well, and they're all thin, and they're in great health. And both the boys are taller than John, so they didn't get stunted in their growth or anything else. And you know, they didn't give me a lot of grief. They didn't really complain too much. They didn't know, you know, all that much. They would, I can remember some of our kids saying, "Oh, we tried some milk at one of their friends' houses and it tasted terrible. I like our milk better." But we were never, what we did is we had this rule that we had healthy foods in the house. And so if they wanted to eat, you know, at home, they had the healthy foods, but we didn't go around and say, "You can't ever eat this." So we weren't like policemen that said, when you go to a birthday party, you can't have any of the cake or the cookies or any of the ice cream. We just said, you know, you can eat this stuff if you want to. And then if they ever complained about how they felt after a party, it was always a great learning experience, because we could say, "Well, why do you think you feel that way? Could it be because you ate too much cake and ice cream?" And so we always we tried to use these things for a learning experience. And we also had another rule. We had I had one thing on the table every night that I knew everybody liked, even if it was just brown rice that they could put soy sauce on, or broccoli. We called broccoli little trees. And I always made a dipping sauce for the broccoli. And so there was always a big plate of something that I knew they loved. And then I would say, "Well, you have to try a bite of this and see if you like it. And then you can eat as much of the brown rice or as much as the broccoli as you want." And so we got them to try new things that way. And as they grew older, they all had favorites. And so it was very interesting in our family.
Which of the three kids was the pickiest eater?
Patrick.
The middle one. Okay.
He still is. He still is the pickiest eater. He likes, you know, certain things. You know, he loved refried beans, or, you know, mashed beans and bean burritos. And he loved pasta with marinara sauce. And now he still likes those things. And there are still, I mean, he still doesn't like onions. And, you know, there were things that he didn't like. And so I would say that he was the most picky of the children. But all of our kids, they married people that were amenable to changing the way they ate. And so all of our grandchildren have been raised vegan also. So we have 7 grandchildren, and they're all vegan, and they've been raised this way, and they're all growing up healthy and full of energy. And, you know, the oldest one is 18 now, and the youngest one is 7. So
that's incredible. You know, do they know who Dr. McDougall is, or is he just grandpa? Like, do they know he's kind of a big deal?
Oh no, they know. They know because of the food company. Well, I think actually Heather's kids were older. And we really spent a lot of time with Heather's kids. We live nearby. So they're the oldest ones. They're 18 and almost 16 and 13. And so when they were young, we did a lot of things with them. We were very active in their lives. And so they came to a lot of lectures. We would take the younger boys with us to Washington, D.C. when John was giving a lecture, and they would sit through the lecture with me. So they knew, you know, that Grandpa talked to a lot of people, and then he was on TV, or they'd watch him on TV. The younger kids, they know him because of the food factory, and his picture is on all the soup cups. And so they go into the store and they see Grandpa Noodles. And our youngest kids, the youngest ones that live here in Portland, Chloe and Logan, there's a ski lodge up on at Timberline. It's on Mount Hood, and they actually sell the noodles in their lodge. And so they go up to this little stand that's in the middle of the courtyard where you can buy foods while you're skiing. And they go up and say, look, they even got Grandpa Noodles here.
Funny. That is so funny. We should get him a t-shirt that says Grandpa Noodles.
Grandpa Noodles, that's a good idea.
I love that. That is hilarious. How adorable. So Susanna, who watches live every day, and we really appreciate it because she comes up with the greatest questions in the chat. She says, are there any secret family recipes that don't appear in the cookbooks or online?
I don't think so. I mean, because we all have favorites. I mean, Heather and I and her boys and her husband and John, we're all really into jackfruit sandwiches. And so we all like those, and the recipe is out there. So it's easy to make. Patrick's family and the lasagna. The lasagna is always a favorite. That used to be a favorite at our 10-day live-in program. As a matter of fact, Doug Lyle, one of our instructors at the program, he used to make sure that he was there on the night that the hotel served the lasagna because that was his favorite. And so the lasagna is a favorite with all of the grandkids. So if I'm going to have them all over, I make lasagna because I know they all love it. And Chloe's birthday is coming up soon, so I'll probably make lasagna. And that recipe is out there. It's been out there for years, and it really hasn't changed all that much. And it's, because we served it at the program. And that's the one thing that we thought would be the most detrimental when we first started the online program, was that people used to really love getting together and coming into the dining room and having the food all fixed for them. We'd have a big buffet spread out, and they could choose, amongst a whole slew of different things. And the lasagna was always a favorite. But what we have found out with the online program is that people learn how to cook in their own kitchen, and they get to cook their favorite foods. And we have enough instructors, and I do a few cooking classes that's in their folder that they can watch me prepare foods that are some of our favorites. And I know you do a class for the online program. Yeah. And I think they have Kathy Fisher and Katie May, who are also, plant-based, oil-free cooks. There's so many of them now. And so they have a chance to see all these other people cooking, and they get to try it themselves. And it turns out that the response that we've had has been that, kind of the opposite of what we thought. We thought people would say, we really like the online program better because, you can get together with people. But we have learned how to do it so that they can still get together with their other participants, and they get together much more personally with John and myself. And they get to do the cooking and the shopping, and they get to ask the questions while they're learning how to do this right at home. And so we have, when we've compared the people that have gone through the online program with the people that have gone to the live-in program, we find that the people like the online program better. So
interesting.
Even though they don't get to eat the food, they like it better because it just seems to be a little more personal, and we give them a little more personal experience, I think.
Yeah, and more one-on-one, more intimate experience. And also for a lot of people, especially ones that live outside the United States, that travel has got to be a big help for them, not having to fly.
And Santa Rosa wasn't all that easy to get to.
No.
You had to fly into San Francisco, and then you had to either take a bus or usually a bus for an hour and a half trip up to Santa Rosa to get to the program. And so it was one of those things that it's much easier when you just have to sit down in front of your computer and turn it on and the class is right there.
You know, in the privacy and comfort of your own home. And every morning you and Dr. McDougall do a session that's about, 45 minutes long, like a fireside chat. I think it's fantastic.
It's really great. Yeah.
Well,
of course the price is so much less than the other one too.
Right. Because you don't have to have lodging and food and air travel.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's one of the great gifts of COVID. So a lot of people watching live, like Diane and PJ, want to know where they can find the wonderful lasagna recipe. And Susanna said, would you ever do a cooking demo of it?
Let's see. Where the lasagna recipe is probably in the mobile app, or it'll be online. You just have to go on into the recipe section on the McDougall website, and which is drmcdougall.com. And put in the search box lasagna, and it'll give you the recipe.
Is it called spinach lasagna? Because if
I think so.
It's on your website. It has like tofu ricotta and spinach. And I'm going to link. I found the link. I'll put it in the show notes and in the chat right now. Mary, I was at a conference once, and both Dr. Doug Lyle and Dr. Alan Goldhammer were asked the question, if they were to be executed for a crime they didn't commit, what would their last meal be? And Dr. Lyle actually did say, your lasagna and chocolate pudding.
Yes. Yeah. We used to serve that probably on the same night, and he would also come for the brownies.
Maybe it was the brownie, but do you want to know what Dr. Goldhammer said he would ask for his last meal?
Yeah, what?
He named a fruit that is now extinct so that they wouldn't be able to find him and he wouldn't have to be executed.
I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so great.
Sounds like Alan too.
He's hilarious. So, Dr. McDougall often talks about his mentors. As a matter of fact, he did a whole show dedicated to them. Do you have any mentors or people that influenced you?
I'm sorry to say I really do not, because, there weren't any people that cooked the same way that I was trying to cook. I think one of the first cookbooks that I ever bought that had vegetarian recipes in it was the one by Francis Moore Lapay, The Diet for a Small Planet. And the other one I got was from Molly Katzen, The Enchanted Broccoli Forest, I think. And those were, there are none of the recipes in there I could use anymore, but those are the first books that I ever looked at that had, at least they were vegetarian at least. And so I could kind of play around with some of those ideas and learn to make, similar dishes without the cheese and without the eggs and without the oil. And, it's really easy. If you find a recipe that just has oil added to it, it's really easy just to, if it's a soup or a stew or anything, or a casserole or anything like that, and they tell you to saute vegetables in oil, well, just saute them in water or in vegetable broth. It's a little harder when you're baking because you have to have a substitute for the oil. And the best one that I found over the years was either a prune puree, like baby food prunes, or they used to make actually a prune fat substitute that they don't make anymore. So these days I usually use a prune puree or a pumpkin puree or some applesauce that adds a little bit of moisture. But if I really can't think of a mentor, unfortunately.
Maybe not for cooking, but maybe is there somebody in life that influenced you?
No, probably John.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
That's neat.
He always encouraged me, to, try and make this, the way that other people would like it, without using those things. And so he never, and there were a few times, there were more than a few times when we all laughed about what I made and just kind of threw it away. But most of the time it was, oh, this was a good idea, and he would sometimes offer some suggestions on things I could do different. Like there's one recipe that I have no idea where I got it from or where I made it from. I cannot find it anymore, but I used to make him this great mixed white bean sandwich with carrots and different kinds of spices. And I remember I used to bake it in the oven, and then I would grind it up. I had this was before food processors came along, and I had a big stand KitchenAid mixer, because I used to bake my own bread when we lived in Hawaii because I couldn't find any healthy bread. And it had a meat grinder attachment that fit on the top end of it. And I would put this bean mixture into the meat grinder and turn it on, and it would come out like this ground up white bean mixture. And I used to make him sandwiches that he used to take on the sailboat. And he still talks about them. And I cannot remember if I ever wrote the recipe down, because I made it all the time when we lived on the Big Island. Can't find it or can't remember it anymore. So I have never been able to duplicate it.
Well, that would be cool. That would be cool if you did.
I know it would.
Well, when a recipe was a flop, did you try to work on that same recipe, like and make it not be a flop, or did you just give up and then just do a different recipe?
It kind of depended on whether I thought it could be saved or not, and whether the ingredients were things that my family would like. I remember there were many things that I used to like. Eggplant. Well, not when I was little, but when I started cooking this way, I liked the flavor of eggplant because I thought it could absorb moisture, and I really liked it in tomato sauces, but that was when I was using cheese, and so the eggplant kind of absorbed the oil and the cheese and things like that. And when I tried to make it without that, the recipes turned out great, and Heather and I loved them, but John hated them. So those are recipes that I just don't make anymore. There's a couple of them that are hanging around in some of the old cookbooks, but it's not one of the favorites. And a few of the things that I tried were, everyone in the family said this is way too hard to chew or something like that. So. And I don't like the flavor. And so those are ones that I just throw away and completely forget. But most of them, they would offer me some suggestions, and I'd say, well, maybe I could just do this with it and, switch out one of these kind of beans for those kind of beans, and use a different kind of pasta and maybe some different vegetables. And so I would try again.
Everybody's a critic, aren't they?
Oh, always, especially your family.
Oh, then they need to know how to cook themselves. You ever wonder, dairy to me is such an unnatural thing. I was born allergic to it, but the idea that somebody would drink from a cow's udder is so weird. You wonder who the first person was that did that. And I know oil, who the first person cooked with it, because if you look historically, oil wasn't a food throughout most of human history because there wasn't a way to make it. When I did some research on it, maybe Dr. McDougall, next time he's on, he can talk about the history of oil. What I found out about oil is that it actually was a prize during the ancient Olympic Games at Greece, and they would adorn their body with it. Nobody would eat it. So I'm wondering who the idiot was that started this cooking with oil, because I mean, some things like cooking with aquafaba, that was a great help to humanity. People
I know, but who decided that? I mean, who was the first one that, poured the juice off the can of chickpeas and decided this was a great idea because you can do so many things with it.
Right. And chickpeas had been around in cans forever. And I'm trying to find that person and get them on the show. But I'd love to know, who started this cooking with oil?
I think it had something to do with Crisco. Remember when we were younger, there were cans of Crisco, which was the white lard type substance. Because when I was younger, I remember that my mom had a can underneath the sink, and it was filled with fat drippings from all the things that she made, like bacon and chicken fat, and they combined them all in this can, and they would put it under the sink. And so I think, and that kind of, I think Crisco came from that. And then people thought, well, instead of having to melt the Crisco, it'd be easier if it was in liquid form and you could just pour it in the pan.
Yeah,
so I mean,
I remember.
That's my guess.
And Jews did something similar. It was called schmaltz. Like they would cook up chicken and make chicken soup, and the fat that was off the top, they would skim it, and it's just crazy, and all that. And that's why people were sick from that. That is something. Hey, which of your 3 kids was the most rebellious? I have a guess, but I'm going to see what you say.
It was Heather for sure.
I knew it. I know, because she's got the same birthday as me, so I figured it was her.
Yeah, but she wasn't. She wasn't really. Well, I guess she was rebellious in food too, but she was the most rebellious. I think she just. I don't know. Maybe girls are that way. I don't know, because neither one of my boys were ever what I would consider rebellious.
Nice.
But
are they more like your personality? Are they more like your personality?
Probably. Yeah. I think Patrick is for sure. I think Craig probably has a little bit of me and a little bit of John in him. And just like Heather, I think she has more John than me.
That's so funny. I can see that. She's going to be on the show soon. We had to reschedule, but she is definitely going to be on. We can,
good.
We can hear fun. We can hear her side of this. So that's great.
That's a good idea.
Mm-hmm. And so, I've asked Craig to be on, but he doesn't respond. So maybe
he really doesn't like speaking in public. It's just not his thing. He tried it a few times when they first moved to Portland. He gave classes and things like that, and it's just really not his thing. He doesn't mind talking about it individually with his patients, but he doesn't really like to get up in front of a bunch of people. And I don't know whether it's because he doesn't want to, follow in his dad's footsteps, or he doesn't want to feel like he's being compared to his dad. But he's good. He's really good. He's a great speaker, and he could do a lot of great things, but it's just not what he likes to do.
Okay, well then I won't ask him. But if he ever changes his mind, because he likes to educate. He gives lectures. And he teaches residents and things like that, but it's more one-on-one than it is in a class or a classroom setting. Because you said he makes a really good dinner that he invites you over for that you guys love.
Noodles, yeah. We were going to go there last night for noodles, but they ate too late of a lunch, and he didn't feel like making noodles last night. So he said, "Can we do it later on in the week?" And we said, "Sure." It didn't matter to us. But he does this great noodle dish with noodles and ramen broth and shiitake mushrooms and tofu, and mixed up various kinds of greens and puts them all in a bowl together, and just really great. And I don't have the recipe for it yet, because every time I've tried to make it, it never turns out like Craig's does. And even though I've stood over him and watched him make it and try to make it at home, it just doesn't turn out the right way, but I'm going to keep trying.
Well, that's cool that he makes noodles.
Someday
I like that he's making noodles for Grandpa Noodles. Well, if he doesn't like to speak, maybe he'll come on the show and make his noodle dish.
Maybe he will.
Maybe he would do that. So Maisie says, what kind of noodles do you use in your lasagna?
Well, I usually, unfortunately, just use the white flour lasagna noodles that are the no-bake kind. This is a special occasion meal. I don't buy the whole wheat noodles that you have to cook. You can do this, but I buy the no-bake lasagna noodles. They're just made from flour and water. So you look for ones that are just made from semolina flour and water. And then you can lay them in the pan, and they cook as they bake. And the mixture kind of it absorbs the liquid from your lasagna into the noodles, and they get nice and full, and you have a great casserole.
And for people that have to be gluten-free, they do make a no bake, no oil brown rice noodle.
Oh, do they? Oh,
yeah.
Brown rice noodles are the best.
Yeah, they do. I've seen it at Whole Foods, I've seen it at Sprouts, and I've seen it on Amazon. Because when I teach cooking at Rancho La Puerta, where I'm going next month, we have to have at least one of our classes gluten-free. And so when we make the lasagna, that's what we use, is the brown rice version. But we do use the no boil because it takes you can spend an hour just waiting for that pot to boil.
Yep.
Yep.
I'm glad they have so many different kinds now. When I first started making lasagna, you couldn't buy no bake noodles. So I had to make my lasagna noodles and drain them. And I remember hanging them over the sink and, letting them dry. And it was awful.
Such an ordeal. I had to do that once recently for an in-person class. And it's like, I'm not doing that again. It takes too long. It's just not worth it.
No, it's not worth it. I've learned over the years that, and another thing I've learned over the years is that people really tend to like simple foods. You don't have to make a big elaborate spread. It just has to taste good. And people really, really like starches. They're sort of a comfort food. And they have favorites like, mashed potatoes and gravy and rice and vegetables, or noodles with pasta sauce, or lasagna. There are favorites that people have. And so I guess that's when I first started, what I tried to do was think about favorites that other people might have, or favorites that we had in our family. I probably have 5 or 6 different recipes of variations on macaroni and cheese. And I have a couple recipes for lasagna, different kinds of lasagna. You can make lasagna with potatoes in the slow cooker, which is really easy and fun to make. And so I guess I tried to take recipes that we liked and, make them into something different, and try and make them easier, because people also don't like to spend hours and hours in the kitchen usually.
Absolutely. At least they don't.
No,
I don't.
And you're a chef and you don't like to spend hours.
I don't like to. I like to batch cook and just not think about it,
Yeah, me too.
Do you do any kind of batch cooking for yourself?
Not too much. When I'm making dinner, I'll make a double batch so that John and I will have lunch the next day. And if we happen to eat it all, then we have grandpa noodles for lunch. Otherwise, I also like to cook the really tiny potatoes thing. They're called new potatoes. And I'll often boil a pan of those, and we'll just eat those for lunch with different kind of salsas and dips and stuff like that. So just a simple lunch is enough. And so leftovers work great for that. But I don't make enough for many meals, because one thing I learned when we first got married is John does not like leftovers.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Never made stuff that, I'd say 2 days later, you want to have this? It has to be something completely different. Now I can make a big pot of beans. I'll make a big pot of pinto beans, and one night we'll have a pinto bean bowl with a Spanish rice that I'll make from brown rice and a salsa underneath, and I'll put the pinto beans on top of that and layer on some lettuce and tomatoes and avocados and some more salsa. And that'll be our burrito bowl that we have for that night. And then I'll mash up the beans and I'll make bean enchilada, or Tex-Mex enchilada, where you mix up the beans with corn and leftover rice if you have any, and black olives and green chilies, and you layer that between enchilada sauce that you make without any oil, just from cans of tomato sauce and cornstarch and a few seasonings. And so I make a kind of a Mexican lasagna with the beans in between layers of corn tortillas.
Yeah, that sounds great. That's so interesting that Dr. McDougall doesn't like leftovers, because I prefer leftovers, because to me, they always taste better than the original.
Well, they sometimes do, yeah. But I always have to be creative and find different uses for my leftovers.
Julie's wondering, when you mentioned you make a lot of jackfruit sandwiches, are these barbecue jackfruit, and you're using the canned, not the fresh, correct?
I'm using the canned, or you can actually on Amazon, you can buy shredded jackfruit, and they're in vacuum packages, and they're not seasoned or anything. The only ingredient in them is just jackfruit. So otherwise I'll use the cans, and I'll have to drain them and rinse them to get the brine off. And so then I just add barbecue sauce to them. But the kind you can buy these, I think it's Edward and Sons makes the shredded.
It's in a box, and I've gotten it on Amazon, but a lot of the Sprouts also sell it.
Oh, okay. And then all you have to do is put it in a pan and add your favorite barbecue sauce, and just let it cook for, maybe an hour, and it's all seasoned and ready to go. So it takes a lot less time than using the canned jackfruit.
Yeah. John, who's watching live, wants to know if you can substitute applesauce for oil in a baking recipe.
Yes, you can, but you don't use the same amount. If your recipe calls for a half a cup of oil, you can use only a quarter of a cup of applesauce.
Oh, and, so it's less. Okay, good.
It works. Yeah, it works really well. And your baked good is not going to get quite as high. Maybe your muffins, will be a little less high than. But and another thing to make sure of is that you don't overbeat. You don't want to stir your mixture too much, because then you end up with little hockey pucks.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have to be really careful.
Yeah, and what's nice about using applesauce is it also doesn't only add moisture, it adds sweetness.
It does, and so you don't need as much sugar or sweetener or whatever you're thinking about using. And I think when you're also using things like maple syrup or agave, instead of the sugar that was in the original recipe, you have to remember to use less liquid, because both agave and maple syrup, or any of the other, you can buy brown rice syrup and barley malt syrup. They all add sweetness without the white sugar, but they also add moisture. And so you'll need less moisture in your muffins or your pancakes or whatever you're baking. I still remember this one time that I made chocolate cake. We were trying to make chocolate cake for a birthday celebration. And so this recipe, I'm not sure where it is. It must be online. I can't remember which book it was in, but or maybe it's on the McDougall app. And I bet I made that same chocolate cake recipe for 4 nights in a row, because I just couldn't get it to get much higher than about this. I just had to play with the ingredients, and so I used all healthy ingredients, but I couldn't use too much liquid, and I had to leave out some of the sugar. And I'll tell you, it was really funny. But the funniest part was, until I got it perfect, we didn't throw away the ones that we didn't like. We ate those anyway, even though they weren't great. It was chocolate and it was something to eat. And so it was one of those things that was kind of funny, because it wasn't the greatest, but we'll eat it anyway because it was chocolate.
Funny. If it has chocolate, it's not bad.
Not bad.
That's funny. That's a good. So in other words, when we're creating recipes, if they don't taste good, just add some cocoa powder.
Yeah, I like that. Right? I like that.
That's funny. Marianne says, are there healthy breads you can actually buy?
There are. Most bakeries, for instance, when we lived in Sonoma County, when we lived in Santa Rosa, there were, I can't even tell you how many bakeries there were that made all kinds of really healthy breads, because bread is basically made from flour, water, yeast, a little bit of salt, and maybe a little sweetener, but it's not really necessary. And the only reason I know that is because when we lived on the Big Island, the stores there were so small that I had to make my own bread. So you only need those 4 ingredients to make bread. And there were bakeries all over Sonoma County that made bread, and I could buy them in the regular supermarket that I shopped in. So we had delicious, whole grain breads, rye bread, seeded sourdough, just delicious breads. Here in Portland, not so lucky. It's much more difficult to find a healthy bread that doesn't have oil in it. And so, I look for breads that are made from all whole grains, are really healthy. And if it does have oil, it's one of the last ingredients on the package. But you keep searching. Whole Foods has a bigger variety of oil-free breads than do most regular supermarkets. And the same thing is true with pizza crusts. You really have to either make your own, which is not hard to do. There's lots of recipes, or you have to really search online to find a recipe or a pizza crust that's all pre-made without any oil added to it. And it can be done, but it's not easy. But you can always go to your favorite bakery and ask them if they'll make you a special bread without any oil. And I found, even in my favorite large supermarket here in Portland, there's a company that makes take and bake breads without any oil. They just have 4 ingredients: flour, water, yeast, and salt. And so I usually end up buying those, and I bake them myself at home. And one thing else I wanted to mention, when I make beans, one other thing that I make with the leftover beans, so I'm not serving beans again for dinner or something the next day, is I make this great bean pizza. So I'll take a pizza crust that I've either made myself or I found without oil in it, and spread the beans over the pizza, and then add salsa, and then usually black olives and a few onions, and bake it in the oven. And then when it gets out of the oven, I add a little bit of shredded cabbage and more salsa. And that's another meal that John likes, and that is not really considered a leftover, because even though it was made with leftover beans, so I have 3 things that I do with leftover refried beans. And but my other leftover beans, I have to get a little more creative.
So he doesn't mind if you use leftover ingredients. It just has to be repurposed.
Yeah, it has to be repurposed, right?
That's so funny. I love it. Rita Lee says, for optimum health, what should our ratio be of starch, veggies, and fruit? I know Dr. McDougall says 90% starch, but I think you, Mary, probably eat more fruits and vegetables. I'm guessing.
I probably eat, I would say I probably eat 45% starch, and the rest fruits and vegetables. I think, to really lose weight, if you really want to lose weight, then 90% starch would be great. And a lot of people out there, that's their goal, is they want to lose weight, and starch is what makes you lose weight. So why not? And then when you get to the weight you want to be, then maybe you can add, a few more fruits and vegetables, and you don't have to think about losing weight, because starch really helps you lose weight, believe it or not.
It's so satisfying. That's why I think.
Yeah. Eat a lot of it.
And you're not afraid. Is there one question that you're, after 50 years, you're just either like tired of hearing or maybe not tired of hearing, but what's the one question that, like, every time you get a new person into the program, or people, like, what do you hear the most from people?
Boy, I think that's something you're going to have to ask Heather, because she sees the people when they first come into the program. I see them. I guess the question that I get asked the most often is, how do you make things satisfying but simple? Most of the people that come through the program are looking for simple things like you and I are, AJ. just, they want to keep it as simple as possible and yet be satisfied. So for them, if I can talk about, the nights when John and I will have, baked sweet potatoes with broccoli and cauliflower as our whole meal, and it'll cover all of our plate, and
It's my favorite meal. I have it for lunch like every day. It just, when I can't have, that's so funny.
It is. And, I think that's one of our favorite meals too. And I mean, the nights that we have, our other favorite meal is fried rice, when I'll use a package of mixed stir-fried vegetables that I just saute in usually in nothing, because they're frozen and they're just going to thaw on their own. And I just let them get really soft. And then I take packages of frozen cooked brown rice and cook them in the microwave, and put those packages into a bowl. Make some baked tofu, which, the recipe. The latest book, I think, is the Healthiest Diet on the Planet. There's a baked tofu recipe in there that I use all the time. And I'll have a whole batch of the baked tofu in that. And I add that to the rice, and then I add the vegetables to that. And there's a lot of companies that make really healthy teriyaki sauces that are made without oil. So I usually add a little bit of teriyaki sauce to the stir fry, and we enjoy that a lot too. And sometimes there's enough left for lunch the next day, and I'll eat it. And sometimes John will eat it too.
Man, you know what? I don't know if it's possible to hire this person, Susanna, because I'm telling you, I'm blown away by the questions she asks, because they're ones that I wouldn't have thought of, but I love this question. Can Mary tell us about her first meeting, Dr. McDougall, from her perspective? We always hear the story from his point of view.
Oh, well, I can still remember the operating room that I was in. And at the time, I was a scrub nurse for a really famous orthopedic surgeon named Dr. Swanson. And he was really famous for inventing the silicone joints that you put into people's fingers that have arthritis when their joints are all crippled up. And he invented these silicone joints, and we would insert them into fingers. It was really a fun operation. They had one for the wrist, they had one for the elbow, they had one for the knees. And so it was great. But anyway, at the time I was working in the afternoon, and I was working with one of his residents that was in training. And we were just doing an ordinary hip pinning before they had the big hip replacements that they do now, where they just take the old hip bone out and throw it away. And back then in 1972, when you broke your hip, you got it fixed, and they pinned it back together with a long thing that looked like a hip with a big flat piece of metal off the side of it, and had screws that went in. And we were doing that, and John walked in as an extra scrub person. And so that's really how we met. I just looked up over my mask, and there he was.
So he was probably wearing a mask too.
Yes.
So he obviously fell in love with you. Did you think he was handsome with the mask? And he was a lot heavier.
He wasn't as heavy as he got after we got married. So at that time he was probably, I'm guessing he was probably only about 180 then. He wasn't that heavy then. He makes it sound like he was, over 200 pounds when we met, but he wasn't. And I wasn't as heavy as I got later either at the time. So yeah, I thought he was cute, but at the time I already had a boyfriend. So I wasn't really looking for anybody else. I noticed him. I thought he was a cute guy, but lots of guys are cute. I didn't really think too much about it. And then he asked me if we could get together sometime, and I just kind of brushed him off and said, no, I'm busy. I have a boyfriend, and so he just kept at me. And
Dr. McDougall is persistent in general, though, isn't he?
Yeah, when he wants something.
So what happened to the boyfriend, and have you been in touch with him?
I actually did. I met him one night after I decided that I was going to go out with John. And I went to I think it was a bar, and I met him there, and I said, I found this guy that, I really like, and I think I want to spend some time with. So I don't think we should see each other anymore. And was
he devastated?
I don't think so.
Have you been in touch with him since?
No.
I wonder if he knows about you, because, you're kind of famous. I wonder if he knows about you.
He's probably dead.
Oh.
he wasn't that healthy that I would ever consider. And his parents died when they were quite young. So I never think about him. So I haven't thought about him in years until you mentioned it. So I wouldn't have the faintest idea, and I would have no interest in even looking him up. Okay. It was, I wasn't serious with him or anything. We were just having fun together. Yeah. But I wanted to let him know that, I wasn't going to be seeing him anymore, because I was going to be seeing John.
Well, that was a very smart decision, and your whole life took a different direction.
My whole life, yeah, it sure did. It really did.
Yeah, we have to thank that patient that broke their hip.
Yeah, that's true. I can't remember whether there was a woman or a man, but because you don't see him when you're doing an operation, everything is covered except for the little spot that you're working on. So
it's so interesting.
Yeah.
So let's see. I saw this interesting question from Anne. What is this happy person element that Mary has that Dr. McDougall refers to? Can she elaborate?
Well, I guess he kind of refers to the fact that I don't get down in the dumps very often. I usually have a very positive outlook on life, and I try to look at things from the best way I can. So, it's always like if he suggests something and I think, well, that might be a little risky, I'll just say, well, why not? Let's just give it a try. Because that's just the kind of person I am. So I guess maybe that's what he considers a happy person, is because I'm willing to try something. If he thinks it's a good idea, I'll try it. Like when we started our food businesses, or when we started our adventure business, it was kind of like, yeah, okay, well, why not? We'll just give it a try and see what happens.
You're the perfect partner for him. You just go with it. I think that's fabulous. Does he get down in the dumps ever?
Not really down in the dumps, but I think he gets frustrated sometime that he can't get through to as many people as he'd like to. I mean, he feels like he has the answer to so many of the world's problems and the people's problems. And if he could just get a large enough audience, then people would, want to listen to him. And like he always says, he expected people to be beating down the path to his door, because there's so many things that food can take care of. And I think he gets frustrated that people don't see the options that he has, or he doesn't have the connections that he would need to get out there and tell the people what they have to do.
Yeah, it's got to be frustrating. Does it hurt you when people are unkind to, him, like on social media, or just,
I don't really read all that much social media. I really don't get online that much. It bothers me somewhat, yes, because most of the time what they're saying about him is not true. People, they say unkind things by twisting what he said. And I know that's not what he meant or how he said it. And so that kind of makes me angry. It's like, well, people, you didn't even bother to listen. you just picked up this one little thing and you said, this is what he said, and it's not what he said, or it's not what he meant. And so that does tend to bother me a little bit.
But he has a pretty thick skin though, right?
He does. I think he's probably learned that over the years.
I wish I could get that quality, because that's a good one.
Yeah,
okay. So Laura says, Mary, I thought I heard you once say that if you're craving sweets after a meal, you didn't eat enough starch. Is that still your opinion?
I think so. I think what I think is that John always talks about people, they're eating so many calories that are empty calories, or that they're you stuff yourselves with pork chops and chickens and all this kind of stuff, and you never satisfied your carbohydrate craving. And so when you see this big piece of chocolate cake or a brownie or some other carbohydrate, you eat it, because even though you're not really hungry anymore, you're hungry for carbohydrates, which, is what really satisfies your hunger drive. So if you didn't eat any carbohydrates, or very few or satisfying carbohydrates, let's say starches, with your meal, then you're going to look for that starch in your dessert. And so I think that's where people get into a lot of trouble, is they always have dessert because that's their starch, and they didn't get enough of that starch when they were eating their meal. So
yeah,
that's still my theory.
I couldn't agree with that more. And I see that all the time. People are so afraid to eat starch, and that's why they have all these cravings. Brilliant. Thank you. So here's a question from Edward. What basic seasonings do you tend to use to help make vegetables taste good? Could you please give an example?
Oh, my favorite seasoning is a seasoning mixture. And they used to sell it at Costco. They probably still do, because it's a Kirkland brand, and it's called No Salt seasoning mixture. It's a blend of 21 organic spices, and it comes in a jar about yay big. And I used to buy it at Costco, and when we lived in Santa Rosa, and I don't know, a few months before we moved away from there, I couldn't find it there anymore. So I looked online to see if they have it, and they sell it on Amazon. So that's where I buy it now. And I use that a lot. I dump it on my stir fry vegetables. It doesn't have any salt in it. So it just a whole variety of organic seasonings. And I can't even tell you which there's more of, because there's so many of them. And so I make a lot of things with that seasoning. I'll add it to soups. I'll add it to stews. I add it to my stir fries. So that's my favorite spice mixture.
I would love it, except I'm allergic to black pepper, and that's one of the ingredients. But it sounds like it has a wonderful blend in there.
It does. It really does.
That's great. Renee says, do you make your own tortillas, or do you buy store-bought?
I buy store-bought. It's easy to find store-bought tortillas that are just made from corn, ground corn and water. You just have to look.
Yep.
And there are some companies now that even make flour tortillas that are just made from flour and water. That's all you need. Yeah. But when we used to do adventure trips, we would, at several of the hotels that we would go to, there would be a woman that would make fresh corn tortillas for every meal, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. She'd be right there. And she'd even have the kids that were on the trip help her make them. And she'd just take it was just this maize flour and water that she mixed up, and it was this big glob of stuff. And she'd just pick off a little handful, roll it between her hands, and flatten it out with her fingers and throw it on the griddle, and it would be done. And so, I mean, with a lot of practice, obviously, she must do this every day. But she let the kids try. She have them put these plastic gloves on and let them pat in there and pat it down to it so it's very thin. And adventure trips, we did them for probably 20 years. And they were really fun. We started them because, people wanted to go on a trip and they didn't want to have to worry about the food. And so we would go ahead of time, at least in the beginning, and scope out the hotel and talk to the chef and give him a menu, or he would make up a menu and we would approve it and we'd tell him what we wanted. And we'd go down and try the food. And we hardly ever had any problems. It would be a 1-week trip. We went to Costa Rica. We went to the Galapagos Islands. We went to Belize. We went to Guatemala. We went to Alaska a few times. We went to Costa Rica the most. We really liked Costa Rica, and went to quite a few different spots in Costa Rica, and never had any problem getting the right kind of food. But then they were cooking for, sometimes we had 100, 120 people that went with us. And so we would have guides and they'd go on adventures during the day and they'd come back for their meals. And it got to be a lot of fun. Getting people off on the buses every morning to go to their adventures and seeing them come back, and everybody had a great time. But what came along? Oh, Zika, the mosquito virus that everybody was afraid of. And so a lot of cruise companies actually stopped. This was before COVID even, stopped their booking their trips because of the mosquito. And so we were going to go to Panama, and we felt we couldn't take a chance that the mosquito would affect too many people that wanted to go on the trip. So we canceled that trip. And then we had the fire disaster, and then COVID came along. And so we didn't go back to doing them.
Yeah. I talked to Ann Wheat yesterday, and she was reminiscing about all the adventure trips. And she told me a story. I'm trying to remember something about how, like, at the end, there was like literally no food left, like that you ate all the food.
That was on our Galapagos trip. And we had made such a big effort, because we flew into Ecuador. I can't remember which city we flew into, but we had to leave. We left from Quito. We flew into a different city in Ecuador, and we hopped on this cruise ship, and the cruise ship took us from Ecuador out to the Galapagos Islands. And we kept telling them, you have to have enough food. And I think Heather actually went on the trip ahead of time and talked to the chefs so they understood what was going on. And we made a big deal about, our people eat a lot of food. You have to have plenty of starches. And they never got it right. The food turned out good, but there was never enough of it. And so we always had to have them make more. And by the last night, when you usually have the captain's dinner, and so it's a little bit fancier, there was literally nothing left. And I took Anne down into the storage area of the ship, and I showed her, and there was actually one bag of white rice left, and it was a small bag. It wasn't even a big 25-pound bag. And that was it. So the last night for captain's dinner, I was in the kitchen with the chefs putting together some kind of muffins that we could ladle a lentil bean sauce over and use some rice as a side dish. And that was our captain's meal, because there was nothing left to eat on the ship. It was amazing, because when you're in Galapagos, you're cut off from all stores where they could shop. And they were meeting other ships on the trip and trading bottles of booze for food. It was hysterical when you think about it now, but at the time it wasn't too fun.
No, and that's the other thing, people don't understand calorie density. They don't understand when you're eating a low-fat diet and an oil-free diet, you need to eat more food, and they'll never get this in the restaurant industry or the hotel industry. You were able to train your chefs at the Flamingo, but I've done 19 conferences, and unless we did the food ourselves, which we did for all but 3 of them, which is very difficult in a way, more cost effective though. The hotel, the same thing happened to us at a conference. They finally got the food right, but they run out. Like, how do you run out of rice and potatoes? It's like the cheapest food. And it's so funny. I guess I'll tell this story. I mean, she may be watching live or in the replay, but we love the Wheats, Larry and Ann. And I had stayed with them a few times when I spoke at the San Francisco Veg Fest. And I was always so excited because, I mean, they've been McDougallers like as long as you pretty much. They've been your friends for years. And so they eat the same way as us. And so I was so excited. And this is before I realized, like, when I travel, I got to bring food with me. And so they made a delicious compliant McDougall meal and they put it out. And I swear to you, I thought that was like my serving, but it was meant for the three of us because, you know, they're a little bit older, so they don't eat quite. And I was like so hungry. So I learned, and I didn't know them well enough yet, like to say, could you take me to this store? Could I have more food? So I was really hungry. So I know now, like always have extra, you know, always travel with a potato in my purse and things like that, because nothing worse than running out of starch.
Now, people don't get it. It took us a long time. We had a few favorite hotels in Costa Rica that we went to over and over again. And so, you know, by the second or third time we were there, they knew, you know, how much they had to make. And so it got a little bit easier. And then Flamingo, the same way, when we first started the live-in program at the Flamingo Hotel in Santa Rosa, Heather and I would be back in the kitchen every single day of every single program, tasting the food, making sure they had enough of it, making sure they made it the right way. And for the first couple of years, at least, this is what we did. And I even had to go in there a few times and show them, look, this is how you make the sauce that you put on the tofu so that the tofu tacos turn out the way they're supposed to and not like mush. And you know, they couldn't make the pancakes. I had to go in and show them this is how you make the pancakes with the bananas and the applesauce. And they didn't get it. You know, it took a couple of years. And, but by the end, of course, they were great because they were so used to cooking this way because we were there for almost 20 years.
I remember meeting them. I think was his name John?
John, yes.
And then Joyce, right?
Joyce.
They seemed very receptive to this. I wish more chefs could be like that. As a result of working with them so long, did either of them change their eating?
I don't think so.
That's so interesting.
I know Joyce didn't, but I'm not too sure about John. I don't think, at least not very much. You know, we had some of the staff there that changed the way they ate. A couple of them noticeably lost, you know, quite a bit of weight. And so they would actually eat the food that was left that, you know, when our people were done eating the food, go back to the kitchen and the staff would eat the food that was left from our program. And they would, you know, cook that way at home. Most of them were Latino. And so they really loved the beans and rice that we always served. And so, it worked out well for them. So we had some people that followed it, but not 100%, but a little bit at least.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. A lot of people are talking about your barbecue jackfruit, and I'm going to post a link to that recipe as well. But somebody named Gloria is asking, could it also be made in a Instant Pot?
I suppose so. I don't know why. I don't use my Instant Pot enough. I use it for potatoes. When I make mashed potatoes, I always make my potatoes in the Instant Pot. I sometimes use it for beans because it cooks them quicker, but I'm so used to my slow cooker. That's how I grew up, or that's how I started cooking, was with a slow cooker. They didn't have Instant Pots when I first started cooking this way. So I loved making my beans in the slow cooker because I knew they would get soft if they cooked all day. I never had to worry about them not getting soft. A few times that I tried in just a regular pressure cooker when they first came out, it was a disaster. The beans weren't soft enough to satisfy my family. And so I threw that one away. But I do have an Instant Pot, and I suppose, but I think you can use the Instant Pot as a slow cooker also, right?
Yeah, you can. There's a feature.
Yeah, so I would probably do it on the slower speed, the slower temperature. and let it take all day, because jackfruit just tastes like nothing if you don't put the seasoning in it. So the longer it cooks in the barbecue sauce, the better it is.
Yeah. I the only thing about slow cooker is it takes a little bit longer, than an Instant Pot.
It does. It takes, I'm trying to think how long I cook my pinto beans, and I think it takes at least, I put them on like 10 o'clock in the morning, and we'll eat them about 6 o'clock at night. So it's like 8 hours. And then they're just about at the right tenderness. But we kind of like our beans mushy. If you like them a little less mushy, I guess they call it more, if you like them more toothy, then you cook them for less time. But I think that the softer they are, the less problems you have with gas, or maybe the longer you eat them, because John and I never have problems with having gas after we eat our beans. So cooking them long, I think, makes a difference for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a nice comment from Jessie. I really love having Mary by herself for the entire interview. I hope she'll be willing to give us more of her time in the future. Just great fun and so interesting to hear her.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. You're not going to want to hear the next thing, because I know you don't want to do it, but I got to tell you, people have been asking for years for you to get in the kitchen and cook again, even if it's just your simple recipes, like what you're talking about. They're not expecting lasagna. Well, they'd like lasagna, but
They like it if I could make them and they could eat it.
Yeah. Oh, they would love that. Absolutely love that. Anyway, so, one person actually wrote a question in advance, which I thought was really nice. Her name is Marilyn, and she says, this question is for Mary McDougall. I've been on and off a plant-based diet for 3 years because I have 5 other people in my house that refuse to eat this way. I know keeping your environment clean is the key to being successful long-term. My family is not on board. They do not support me. It has turned into a very negative subject. It gets exhausting listening to all the negative feedback about my efforts of trying to be plant-based. I feel very alone about it, and this can make me feel down and discouraged. If one of my teenagers makes cookies or brings home junk food, I'll sometimes cave and eat because I feel emotionally down or just drained. When I prepare meals, my 4 teenage boys will say, yuck, is that vegan food? I'm not touching that. My husband usually won't even try it, and he's overweight. It's hard. How do I stick to it when I start to feel down about it and I don't have family support? I could get rid of all the non-vegan ingredients in the house, but then my boys will be very resentful towards me. I've stopped buying meat, but not dairy, because they will complain up a storm to everyone. My boys are always complaining that I don't make meals anymore that they like. There is nothing to eat in the house. I tend to be a people pleaser. Please help. Mary, I want to hear your answer, but I'd also recommend she have a session with Dr. Doug Lyle.
I think she should. Yeah. I would suggest definitely that she comes to one of our residential program, not our online programs, because she'll get a lot of ideas on how to make it work when the rest of your family does not do this with you. It makes it really, really difficult when you don't have the support of your family. But we have so many people that go through so much with each individual participant that they would have so many suggestions for her that would make it easier for her. She'd have a support specialist with her every day for 12 days. They would give her ideas on what to do for her family, what to do for her children, what kind of meals that she could make that would please everyone. The best thing that we have found over the years is that, you find some things that your family likes, like the lasagna or the just pasta with the marinara sauce. And then you have other things on the side that they can add to it. Like if they want cheese on their lasagna, then you have some grated cheese that you can put on their side of the lasagna. Or if they like meatballs, you can have them put that on top of the healthy pasta and marinara sauce, and they can put meatballs on theirs. or you can do a fried rice dish, like I make, and then have grilled chicken strips that they can put on their side. So you try and combine the two together, but it's hard. You have to have a lot more willpower than most people have, because you have all this other stuff in the house that you used to eat. And these days it's even harder, because ads on TV, or you walk into the store and you're hungry and all this convenience junk food is there. And it makes it really difficult unless you're really committed. I really feel sorry for her, because that does make it extra hard. And one thing I would suggest is that she does like you and keep potatoes around so that she can eat when she's hungry. So the food that she has to make or keep around for the rest of her family doesn't look as tempting, because if your stomach is full, you're not as tempted to eat the other things, which is one of the things we always recommend to people. If you're going to go to a party, or if you're going to go to someone else's house, or like for you, when you're going to go traveling, take food with you or eat before you go someplace, so that your stomach is full and you're not tempted by the other stuff that's there, because the familiar things and the familiar smells, they get to you if you're hungry. And it just makes it very hard.
It's really hard. I think this is what I hear the most from everybody.
Yeah.
It
makes it much easier if your whole family is doing this together. I mean, like for us, when we started, our kids were really little, or they didn't even know any different. And so we all did it at the same time. And when my children, brought their kids up, this is all they served them. So they didn't know anything different. But if kids are used to eating all the junk and the sodas and the just all the stuff that's out there, the fried foods, and they don't want to change, it's really difficult. I mean, you can inspire them by saying, well, you might lose some weight, you'd be able to run faster, you wouldn't have pimples on your face. If you could get something that would get in their head and say, well, maybe I can give it a try. But, it's like our husband, if she can't get him and think, well, maybe I'd lose weight, I wouldn't have any heart problems, or I wouldn't have any diabetes. But there are people that just don't care, unfortunately. And I think this is one of the things that we find so frustrating, is that, you can tell them and teach them, and they don't care about themselves. They just don't care. They'd rather eat to their death.
Yep.
And
there's nothing we
very
can do about it.
frustrating.
I think it's even harder for her, because she mentioned she's a very agreeable person. See, now, if this was my situation, I would just say, well, family, you have two choices. Take it or leave it. Don't let the door hit you on the way out.
I know that's what you would do, definitely. But see, I'm not like that either. I mean, I would probably do what I said, is, make sure that I was always full, and I'd have a place for my stuff, and I try and make things that they liked and could add to. But it does make it hard.
Absolutely. Here's a nice comment from Anne. What an incredible talk. Mary is an outstanding woman, and people really love having you on. So I know I promise not to keep you too long, because I know Dr. McDougall, he does marathon sessions. This is a Mary-thon session.
Yeah.
But I do have one final question, and
okay.
you might want to think about it for a second, because in 1058 shows, this is my 1058th show, I've only asked this question once, but I really liked it. It got a good response. So there's a movie you may or may not be familiar with. It doesn't really matter, but it was a wonderful movie I saw many years ago called Afterlife. It was actually a Japanese film, and it was a very poignant film that touched me deeply. And it was about the idea is that when we die, we go somewhere, and that in order to go to that place, we have to take a memory with us, and that's we have to choose one, because you view your whole life and then you pick one. And in this movie Afterlife, these people were at a way station because like they hadn't chosen their memory. And so if that was true, thinking about the wonderful life you've had, what memory would you take with you?
Oh, wow. Boy, AJ, that's really a tough one.
Okay, you can think about it, and next time you come back, you can answer it then. How's that?
All right, because there are so many great memories, and mine would have to involve John and all my children and my grandchildren. And there's so many different parts of my life that they all fit into. Heather and Patrick were around when we had the sailboat, and they all were around when we had the ski condo, and only Craig was really around when we had the airplane, and John was around all the time. So it was, but it would be very hard to pick. And then we had, John and I had so much fun with the three boys that were Heather's, and we did so many fun things with them and traveled with them, and it would be hard to fit all of it in to one special memory, because there are just so many great ones.
Right. Well, that's why it was so hard for the people in the movie too. But what was interesting, and I hope you get a chance to see the movie, is that the people in the movie, just like we talked about recipes, ended up picking the most simple memory.
Oh, yeah.
Like you say, the birth of the child or whatever. I'd probably pick the day I married Charles, my wedding day.
Oh, yeah.
Because I feel like all good memories afterwards came as a result of that.
Yeah, because of that. That's true.
Yeah. Well, Mary, this was so much fun. And people are saying, hey, have her back, because you're allowed to speak without him.
I guess so. And we have a lot of other things to cover, I suppose.
Yeah, but you guys are great together. You guys remind me of peanut butter and chocolate. You're great together, but you're also great on your own.
Oh, well, thanks.
Oh,
what am
right.
I? Peanut butter or chocolate?
Oh, you're definitely chocolate. Definitely chocolate, because you make everything better, which we learned today. Okay. If a recipe doesn't work, just add chocolate.
That's right. I love it.
That's what we learned today. Thanks so much, Mary.
Thank you, AJ. It was great fun.
It was really fun. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when my guest is Amy from Be Green with Amy, and she is going to be doing a cooking demo. Take care.